Let's be clear about something right from the start. Financial stress isn't some kind of personal feeling. It's actually a predictable psychological response to the complex and often chaotic economic world we live in. Today, we're going to unpack the mechanics of how our minds work under pressure and explore how we can build a more resilient foundation for making clear-headed decisions, especially when it matters most. So let's dive right into the question that, a lot of us, especially professionals and business owners, have probably asked ourselves in private. When the numbers aren't lining up, is that a reflection of our own shortcomings? Is this on me?
Well, the answer really begins when we completely reframe the problem. Because what you might be feeling isn't unique to you. In fact, all the research shows it's a completely normal, even predictable response to the intense pressures of our modern economy.
Okay, first things first, and this is probably the most important thing to really let sink in. Experiencing financial stress or anxiety is not a reflection of your character. It's not about your intelligence or your capability. It is absolutely not a sign of weakness. Instead, try to think of it like this. It's a direct psychological reaction to very real, very powerful external pressures. Things like market volatility, not knowing where your next check is coming from, and the sheer mental effort of managing debt. All of that creates a very specific and very heavy kind of strain on the mind. Now, what's really interesting is that experts actually have a name for this. It's called financial anxiety, and it can affect absolutely anyone. It doesn't matter what your income is or how financially savvy you are. It shows up in our thoughts, in our bodies, that feeling, that knot in your stomach, and in our behaviors, like compulsively checking our bank accounts over and over. So how exactly does this anxiety manage to hijack our thinking? To really get that, we need to take a look at the architecture of our own thought patterns when we're feeling that financial pressure. You see, our minds can create what psychologists call cognitive distortions. These are basically mental shortcuts or feedback loops that aren't actually based in reality, but man, do they feel real. They act like a magnifying glass for stress, tricking us into believing a situation is way worse than it actually is. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, gives us a great roadmap here. It identifies several common patterns you might even recognize. First, there's black and white thinking, where an investment is either a total home run or an absolute failure, with no room in between. Then you've got catastrophizing, where one single late payment spirals into this vision of complete financial ruin. And then there's personalization, where you take all the blame for something like a market downturn that is completely out of your control. And this slide right here shows us the way out. The real key is to reframe these thoughts. You've got to shift from an unhelpful emotional conclusion, like it's pointless, to a neutral system-based observation. Notice the difference? You're not fixing your character, you're fixing a process. That small mental shift is incredibly powerful. Okay, so understanding these mental patterns is the first big step. It allows us to move from a state of being trapped by anxiety to building something much more powerful, what we call psychoeconomic resilience. So what is it exactly? Well, it's the ability to adapt and, most importantly, to maintain clear, rational decision-making even when you're right in the middle of financial stress. This isn't about being immune to pressure or never feeling it. It's about building the capacity to think clearly within it. So the crucial point is this. It's a fundamental shift in who's in control. You move from feeling controlled by your financial anxiety to becoming the architect of your response to it. You're taking back the driver's seat. All right, so that's the goal. But how do we actually build this resilience? How do we put it into practice? Well, research points to several practical frameworks for restoring that essential clarity of thought. What all these strategies have in common is that they focus on creating structure and visibility, which are the natural enemies of anxiety. Taking small, concrete actions builds momentum and gives you a sense of progress. Actively looking for those cognitive distortions helps you see reality more clearly. And things like self-compassion or asking for help, those aren't soft skills. They are strategic tools for maintaining your best cognitive function under pressure. And all of this leads us to what might be the single most important takeaway from this entire analysis, a core principle for building resilience that actually lasts. There's this huge misconception out there that overcoming financial stress is just a matter of willpower. That if we just think positive or try harder, the anxiety will just disappear. But all the evidence shows that's just not how it works. Willpower is a finite resource, and it gets drained incredibly fast when you're under stress.
True sustainable resilience comes from creating better systems. We're talking about things like automating your payments and savings, creating a clear budget that basically makes decisions for you, or setting firm boundaries on your investments. These systems reduce the day-to-day mental load, and they support clear thinking when you need it most. They do the heavy lifting so your willpower doesn't have to.
And ultimately, this is what it all comes down to. Understanding the mechanics of your own mind, your biases, your thought patterns, your responses to stress, that is the single most critical asset you have. Gaining clarity about our own financial psychology isn't just a nice to have. It's the very foundation for making sound decisions and building sustainable success, both in business and in life.